Welcome to the Matthew Moran podcast. Here you will find a series of in-depth conversations with the world's best nature photographers, conservationists, designers, editors, writers, and publishers. You will get an insight into the lives of creative professionals and industry experts, and it is a chance to hear their stories, personal journeys, and how they carve a niche to make a living in a rapidly changing, highly competitive, but hugely exciting field. I've had the pleasure of working with many of my guests over the years, and have learned so much from spending time with them and having conversations about what it means to be a creative freelancer, sourcing exciting projects, sharing skills through partnerships, and not losing sight of your goals and dreams. This podcast is my chance to share these conversations with you. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Today my guest is Karine Aigner. Karine grew up in Saudi Arabia, and her fascination with the natural world began at a young age with catching fish from the ocean for her home aquarium and rescuing the local kittens. She had every pet imaginable. Her route to becoming one of the best known wildlife photographers today is unconventional. She worked on the other side of photography, for 9 years in fact, as the senior picture editor for National Geographic Kids magazine. And whilst there, she absorbed everything she could about nature photography. Not just what makes a good picture, but much more importantly, how to tell a good story. Karine's experience as an editor has helped her to be highly critical of her own work, and whilst this can sometimes give her a headache, it's forced her to go deep into her subjects by working with researchers and biologists to really get under the skin of a place or animal. Karine leaves no stone unturned, and the results have been spectacular. Take her bobcat story, for example, which recently featured on the front cover of BBC Wildlife magazine, National Geographic Online, and one of the images received a highly commended award in a recent Wildlife Photographer of the Year exhibition. She has worked on conservation stories with the Audubon Society and Sea Shepherd, photographing a range of subjects from songbird trafficking and people in conservation to bats, manatees, and pythons. Karine and I caught up in my garden studio in London to talk at length about her approach to photography, being fully immersed in her subject, and how to stand out from the crowd in the digital and social media age. Please don't forget to leave a review on iTunes after listening to this. It really helps to spread the word about all these interviews with such inspiring photographers and people. Enjoy. Karine, welcome along. Really exciting because until like a few weeks ago, I knew of you, but the powers of social media, we had a little bit of contact, and it was a funny story really. So Karine has been posting these great stories about bobcats, and I'm going to encourage all the listeners to go and obviously check out all your feeds and your work. So we'll put all of that up in the notes. So I commented, and we had a bit of a back and forth, and I said, hey, any time you're in London, I'd love to interview you for my podcast. And you're like, oh, well, so as a matter of fact, I'm going to be here. You're running this workshop here in England for a couple of weeks. And you said, oh, in fact, I'm going to be there next week. And now we're here. You're sitting in my studio in Tottenham. And I'm really grateful. So thanks so much for your time.
Well, thank you for having me. I didn't expect to be sitting in your studio either after our back and forth.
I know.
You know, so this is the power of social media.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? And a positive side of it, because you and I have already talked about some of the negative sides and how it can kind of also get you down, this sort of feeling you need to be out there and showing your work all the time. But yeah, this is definitely a good side of it. So thanks so much.
Meeting the people you follow.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is the cool part.
And we've Karine arrived early this morning, so we've talked a lot in the last few hours. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. Hopefully you're going to stay awake during this, because she's been traveling loads, and you've done a long flight, and hopefully you're going to get a good night's sleep tonight. But
on your floor.
Yeah, absolutely. Right here in this studio doubles up as a guest room. So yeah, this is great. My first question is, what are you doing here in the UK? Tell the listeners a little bit about your workshops.
I run something called, or I started with a partner, photographer Lucas Bustamante. We started kids conservation photography workshops where we work with youth to through photography, pair them with real biologists on the ground and real nature, and we get them out into the world to tell stories with the camera. So they actually have to experience and shoot in 10 days a story.
Wow.
Yeah. So through the power of the camera, we create a connection with the natural world. And it's a really powerful thing. So I started thinking about other workshops and ended up partnering with the Canid Project and doing a workshop here in the UK with the Fox Project.
Right.
So kids like foxes,
Sure.
and I want them to tell stories. So we figured we'd get them in with a nonprofit and show them how it works on the ground, boots on the ground, real life situations. And they're going to have to figure out, what images they make and put together a whole edit and a presentation at the end of the week.
Yeah, you're not going to tell them how to make a photo story.
No, they're going to do it.
Yeah.
We'll do a few presentations. We'll have some speakers come in, such as yourself, and they're going to have to figure it out. I've worked with some of these kids before, so they know the drill a little bit.
Yeah.
And then we have some new ones too, which is always fantastic.
That's great.
So,
and a lot of the photographers that, I speak to, and, we had this conversation earlier about there aren't that many who don't do some kind of workshop for a living, but yours seem like quite different, very much focused on storytelling, and you're also involved with Girls Who Click.
Yeah.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that organization and then those workshops and how they differ from your own.
Yeah, Girls Who Click was started by another photographer named Susie Esterhaus, and she started. She wanted to get girls into the world of photography, nature photography. So I am one of the female pros that do free workshops for girls, and actually just finished my first one in Florida, and we had 11 students. It went fabulously.
Great.
We had everything from iPhones to DSLRs.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. And so it gives them a little bit of taste of. I also had a biologist working with us, so they got to see a bunch of females in the business. So they got a little bit of inspiration from that day, and everybody went home happy and blown away, right? So it was a great day, and I think it's a great thing to be doing, especially in this day and age when we need more females out there, especially female wildlife photographers. They bring so much to the table. And we need to help them get out there and know that these are real jobs for women. So that workshop, those differ from mine because in terms of length, that was one day. I do 3 or 10 days usually. And I like to do storytelling because I believe that it's one thing to make a pretty picture, and that's fantastic. But I want kids to understand the power of the images, and when you string images together, what can happen when that happens. And I also believe very, very strongly in the camera as a tool for connection, a tool to create awareness and empathy. And what happens, not just kids, but to anyone who uses the camera, is there are a lot of organic things that happen that we don't think about. So confidence, pride, engagement, things that, we don't think about those things as they happen, but they all come out as feeling in the end, right? So when you're working with teenagers who, get a bad rap as it is, it's crazy. People have asked, why do you go overseas? Well, for me, no one forgets their firsts. Right? You don't forget your first kiss. You don't forget the first time you scored the winning goal. You don't forget your first trip overseas. Right. And for some of these kids, it's the first time they've gotten on an airplane by themselves. It's the first time they've seen another country. It's the first time they've heard another language around them. So you tie that all in with an incredible experience photographically with the camera. They learn to work together. They learn to create strong imagery. There's a strength in that, and then they have to create a product in the end. And then we have a presentation.
And these are life skills, not just photography skills.
They're life skills. So in the end, sure, it's great that they make good pictures and they have a story, but I just want them to connect with other cultures in the natural world. That's really what our goal was in the end, was to sort of switch on a light that something exists outside of your neighborhood. You know, that's not to say don't work in your neighborhood, but we've had kids who've gone to Ecuador and then connected some of the native culture in Ecuador with their home in Canada. And it clicked in Ecuador. So that student went back to Canada and was now interested in the native culture there.
Yeah.
Right. So it translated over an ocean, but it had to go away to come back.
Right. We often do that, don't we? We want to go abroad first before looking what's on our doorstep.
Right. But sometimes you need to go abroad first to see what's on your doorstep.
Yeah.
Or to take more notice of what's on your doorstep.
For sure.
And so that's what these workshops did, and they've been pretty powerful. So, we continue them.
That sounds great. And what I loved about when you were talking about them earlier was that this is not just about, and particularly with the girls who click, the photographers going out to learn to become wildlife photographers because, they're young and they may have different interests, but having that experience of connecting with nature, having that experience of conservation and the environment, learning about animals, learning about respect, all of these things, whatever path they end up taking, they'll carry that experience with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that experience is the reason we end up doing things and making the choices that we do. So if you have positive experience, it's a no-brainer. You have a positive experience photographing a creature that you once hated and now you see through a lens and is so cool and amazing, you're only going to build on that positive experience. You might go back out and go to the next rainforest and learn about that one. You might become interested in biology. You might, if you become a lawyer, you might decide that it's very important for you to work in environmental law. So these things have, tentacles and they branch out. Yeah. So it's not about just photography in the end.
No.
So, yeah.
And what got you into photography? Going back a few years.
Oh boy. Surprisingly enough, I was never interested in photography. My world that has ended up photographic started out with animals. So I was the one face down in the ocean, catching fish for my own aquarium. I was saving kittens, and we had every animal in the book as pets. And as I got older, I grew up in Saudi Arabia. So I spent 10 years in Saudi Arabia, where our world was right there, and that's where all the kittens and fish and all that happened. And then I tried to continue that when we left. And then I had to buy fish as opposed to catch them myself. And sort of that lost the
magic.
Yeah, that lost its magic. But I always had pets. We always had lizards or something in the house. And then I went and traveled and brought a camera with me. I'd been given a camera as a graduation present from college and never thought about it as a career, never thought about it as a job. And the turning point for me came after I'd traveled with friends around the world. I had lived overseas for a year teaching English, and we did just a slideshow presentation for family in one of my best friend's living rooms. So her parents were there, my parents were there, and we had our third friend, her parents were there and her family was there. And I showed a picture of an Aka village woman in Thailand with a little child. It's just a portrait. It's a simple, not even a great portrait. And my friend's mother started tearing up and crying. And I thought, what the hell is going on here? What?
Yeah.
I was the one with the experience overseas. I was in that village. I watched the soccer game that ensued with the ball that we brought up the hill and the mountain, So why is she crying? And that's when it clicked that the power of an image. I brought home an experience and an image to a living room in Connecticut and made someone cry. And that was sort of a turning point for me when I thought, okay, there's a power in that. That's if I can make someone cry with a picture, that's a pretty cool thing. So that's when photography sort of became something that I thought was cool. And I could never figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. So, you know, photography was the one thing I didn't hate. And then, you know, life went on.
That's a good starting point.
Yeah,
right?
no, exactly. You know, it's like internships. Like in my world, you do internships so that you can check off the things you don't like, right? Did that as an internship, not going to do that again next internship. But that's when my interest in photography, well, that's when I started paying attention. And then I had all sorts of different things that happened along the way where I ended up becoming an assistant to a wedding photographer. I did wedding photography for a while. I sort of lied my way into a photo editing job with a real pretty picture portfolio of travel, yet I didn't know how to photo edit. And the guys who hired me said, the day that I walked into the office, they said, here's the photo editor's desk. We fired her yesterday. We don't really know what she did. And I thought, I'm thinking, oh my God, I don't know what a photo editor does either. Right?
Fake it till you make it.
No, and I spent literally 2 years faking it until I made it. And I had to learn on my feet. And it was one of the best jobs I actually had, because I had to learn how to hire models. I had to learn how to set up a shoot, to do all this stuff I'd never learned how before.
Who was it for, by the way?
Psychology Today magazine was my first photo editing job. Yeah. And they're still around, actually. And I think there's a European version. There's a French version called Psychologie, which is the same. It's a sister magazine. So it looks the same. It looks similar. But yeah, that was all about people and celebrities. Had nothing to do with animals at all. Then, you know, my life continued, and I took a photo workshop in Maine with a Nat Geo editor-in-chief and picture editor for Nat Geo Traveler, kept in touch with them. And one thing led to another. Years later, with Psychology Today magazine, we went down to Washington, D.C. to photograph the First Lady at the time, Laura Bush. And I sort of had a lunch with the picture editor and begged for a job at National Geographic. And that was how I went from picture editor in New York to picture editor in Geographic. And the photography I wasn't a shooter, really. I shot on the side. I shot weddings and that kind of stuff, but shooting was not my primary focus. I was a picture editor by trade at that point in time.
And presumably by this time, with a couple of years experience and, you know, you faked it and you made it. Yeah. Did you walk into National Geographic with more confidence?
You know, I think everyone whether you're a photographer who's got an assignment for National Geographic, whether you're a picture editor, a researcher, or a writer, and your dream at some point was National Geographic, and mine was. Not as a picture editor. I mean, no one really thinks about, I want to be a Nat Geo picture editor. They say, I want to be a Nat Geo photographer, right? When you walk in those doors, it's like a dream. It's like you're finally there. And I can't say I walked in thinking, oh my God, they're better than me, because I was there. Of course. And I made it there. So I was like, wow, this is now my world. Now I was one of the team. And so it was the realization of a dream in a way. And then it became an addiction and a life, you know, that went on from there.
And what was the job? What was your first job there?
I was the senior picture editor at National Geographic Kids magazine for 9 years. Yeah.
Wow. So you started doing that and you stayed doing that
I started doing it and stayed doing that. And it's I mean, like any job, it's all new in the beginning. And then as you get settled into the job, I started shooting. I'd beg my boss for, can I go shoot that? Because we could either hire someone to do it or I could do it. And we needed some funny things, we needed smiling dolphins and smiling dogs and smiling everything. And, I used to have the funniest conversation with photographers, and they'd say, what do you need? And I would say, I would need smiling dolphins. And I'd get they're like, yeah, right. I'm like, no, I'm not kidding. I need a dolphin that looks like it's smiling, and we'd have these funny conversations about, smiling animals. And so
everything's got a smile in a kids magazine.
Yeah, right? It does. Yeah. And I had a fabulous time. I mean, I got to photograph dogs and ducks who were friends, tree climbing, dogs, all this stuff. And
Yeah.
it was fun. And
it's interesting that you were keeping, photography going. Obviously, it was a passion of yours, but, again, we've talked about this already, but it's kind of wrestling match between being an editor and a photographer.
Yeah.
And my instinct is that, oh, wow, that would be so good, because you'd be like so good at editing your own work, and you'd be like highly critical, and you know what National Geographic wants, and you know the look and feel of what makes a really, really good photograph. But it's still a bit of a struggle, right? Doing both.
Wow. For me, I guess I was my own worst enemy. So when I worked on staff, I knew what we needed. So that was sort of easy, because there was always one shot that I knew would run, because the dog needed to be smiling and the duck needed to be smiling and they needed to be shaking hands or whatever the moment was. So that was easy. Once I left having set a very, very high bar for myself, which was the National Geographic bar. And so that kind of, it was good, because it pushed me to excellence, to say, okay, that's not good enough. I need it to be like this or like this.
Yeah.
But I think also I was my own worst critic, and it also stopped me from showing work because I felt like the work wasn't good enough. So
kind of torments you in a way as well.
For life, I think. Yes, absolutely. But I've always struggled between, do I want to be the picture editor and do I want to be the photographer? And I think that's a tough struggle, because you're always getting cut off. One road's getting cut off by the other constantly, where you as a photographer, you need to go in 100%. If you're going to be a picture editor, you need to go in 100%.
And are you still picture editing?
I freelance picture edit every once in a while for something, but I haven't in a while.
Right.
I've actually gone more the workshop route and teaching route.
Yeah.
So that's the third leg of this problem.
Sure.
Right? Is like, I like to picture edit, I like to shoot, and then I also like to teach and connect, which is really important to me, because that gives me some purpose.
Yeah, sure.
Or some give back.
Yeah. And I also think it's, again, you have to think of the realities of how you're going to make your living as a nature photographer, and running workshops is such a good way of doing it. And also diversifying is kind of fun. I mean, maybe you would, the Holy Grail being Nat Geo, being sent on assignment all the time sounds awesome, but I'm sure for a lot of the photographers that do it, could also be a real pain in the neck. Maybe they have families they want to see, maybe, they miss their dog, and okay, that's not coming from a place of bitterness, because I haven't been there, but it's always, every step you go higher on, that rung of the ladder, you're always thinking, oh, what about above that? I want to be a Nat Geo photographer, but the Nat Geo photographer's like, oh man, this is a real pain in the arse. I'd really just love to be at home right now. I'm being eaten by ants and I'm not getting the shots I want.
Right. Look, I think the grass is always greener wherever you are. So I wouldn't give up those shoots. And we all get bitten by ants and complain about it and say, God, why am I doing this? But I think for some of us, it's also a bit of an addiction, you know. And for me, look, I grew up moving from place to place. So once I spent, 10, 12, 13 years overseas, formative years, but years that, I never felt American. I felt like I belonged somewhere else. Right. So I was never happy in one place. I always had to go. I always had this feeling of, I need to go. It's time to go. Where's the next trip? When I went to high school in the States, my first year in high school in the States, my mom's, I asked, we used to go away in the summer. Every summer in Saudi Arabia, we'd go away. It was just too hot to be there and there was nothing to do. So we'd go visit family in the US. And one summer, the summer we came there, we were the first year in the United States. I said, where are we going? And my mother said, we're not going anywhere. We're here. And I was like, what do you mean we're not going anywhere? And this now has sort of been, this ghost has chased me for a long time. Mm-hmm. So the fact that I do several things is probably a product of this need to move. So I like diversity. When I was a picture editor at Nat Geo, at the kids magazine, I used to do some of the shoots, and that kept me happy. That kept certain monotony from setting in.
Sure.
Right. So I remember sending text to my boss saying, just thanking her, thank you so much for letting me do this, because it was like getting out and being part of that world that as a picture editor you see. So I got to experience it rather than just look at it through someone else's pictures.
And 9 years is a long time in any job.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah.
Especially these days.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. And moving on to your photography, we've talked a lot about conservation photography today, and the work that you're doing and these kind of long-term projects. And I learned about your new project today with burrowing owls, which is sounds really exciting. Maybe it'd be good to kind of just talk a little bit about that now, because it sounds like a really great story in the making.
I never shot animals. I wasn't interested in animals. So working at the kids magazine, our subject was animals. I had shot weddings. I used an old Mamiya RZ film camera, just to do fun portraits of my friends. And if I look back at those portraits, I was doing a presentation the other day looking at these portraits. These look like commercial lifestyle portraits. I never sold one of them, but the work is really, to me, it's beautiful. It's like these really strong, striking portraits of just family and friends that I did for fun. So at one point there was a turning point, because at the kids magazine it was all animals all the time, and then I went to Africa and I fell in love with Africa, and it gets under your skin and all that stuff is true. And but what happened is I got tired of just pretty pictures, and I wanted my photography, and I don't know why, I don't really know how this happened, other than maybe I got bored with my own work. So I wanted it to make a difference. And so a lot of the work I do now, or what I've been doing, is my interest is this sort of intersection between man and animal. Mm-hmm. And, for me, unfortunately, it's more what we're doing to animals, or to wildlife, or to the natural world that we live within or around. And so it's our relationship with the natural world, which is interesting to me. So I'm always looking for these little fun stories. And the burrowing owl story is something that's unpublished at this point, that I am working on for Audubon. And it's a story of a wonderful little owl that's pretty much said, screw you to humans, and has decided it's going to live right smack in some of the densest real estate around.
Amazing.
And it digs holes in people's yards, and it burrows, and it has its families there. And it's become this little icon in a community, in a couple communities in Florida. And it's become part of the community, and the community has rallied around the species.
It's causing a bit of a stir, but there's a small contingent that are, wow, this is amazing.
That are saying that we're going to protect this animal. And I think now, in the state of the world with the environment, there needs to be more of that. There needs to be more of this protection, of this just adamant protection that, with no questions, we are going to protect it. We've displaced it. We've put our own homes in its home. And for me, it's almost like we need more of non-negotiable rules with some of this stuff. No, we are going to protect it. End of story. A little bit of an inconvenience to your real estate. Well, sorry. We've inconvenienced so many of these species to the brink at this point. So what's an owl burrowing in your yard? Yeah,
and what's it going to take to stop it?
Right. So you're not going to stop it. At least no. Yeah. I mean, this is a character, but yeah. So that's a lot of the work I enjoy, and it's a lot of the work that I do is, exploring these relationships, and a lot of times, unfortunately, it's the trade or the negative side, or the negative things that we're doing, because those stories are the easiest to tell, almost in a sort of strange way. Those are the ones that everyone wants to focus on all the time.
Yeah.
The positive ones are less endearing in a way. I don't know.
And with this story, is it similar to how you're running these workshops, that you found it? I don't know how you found the story. Maybe you could let us know. I don't know if it's a secret, but you found this idea. Do you start researching, see what else has been done? Do you then think, I need to team up with some experts? Obviously access is always like the biggest issue. Getting access is how you're going to get really good pictures. And so are you then acting out what you're teaching your kids in these storytelling workshops, for example?
Well, in this case, yeah.
Because they'll also be listening to this.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm not going to tell them about it, but so with this story, I'm trying to remember how it came down. I think I'd heard about burrowing owls, and I was doing a shoot in Miami, and I know burrowing owls they exist across the United States and North America. Actually, they exist in South America and all over. So I started doing research, just quickly Googling them, seeing what was going on. And I saw a bunch of work being done in Canada. And then I saw these Florida burrowing owls. And I was in Miami, and then I Googled, burrowing owl, where can I see them? And you could see them in a park just outside of Miami. I forget the name of the park. But so I went there on my own thinking, all right, am I really going to see these things? Are they really here? And sure enough, they were there. And I thought, okay, this is crazy. These little guys are in a park. They're posted off. So their little burrow has some rope and 4 posts around it. It says, please don't disturb the burrowing owls. But these guys are literally part of a park where, they're guys working out on the outdoor gym. There's people running. There's strollers going by. And these little guys are a foot away from everybody. And I thought, oh my God, what is this?
And they're like, my first thought, what about dogs?
Dogs are there. I mean, they're almost, so as cute as they are, they're almost the epitome of the angry bird. They have such personality, and they're pretty hardcore. If they don't want you close, they let you know. They scream at you. They have a sound that sounds like a rattlesnake, and they'll blow themselves up big, and they're great. And I think that's what I actually fell in love with, were these little personalities.
The attitude.
Right? The attitude. So I thought, man, this little guy, they have pulse. Like, they really, there's something there. Then I started researching them. Come to find out, their numbers are declining. So same story, right? Usual story. And then I looked further, and I came across a community in Florida where they were protecting them, where there was an organization that was started in order to help them. And it turns out the organization was made out of women for the most part, started by a woman. So this got me more curious. I ended up contacting the biologist whose name kept coming up, and I emailed and said, hey, I'm interested in this. What's the story here? Because I see that they're threatened. And the biologist jumped in wholeheartedly, and it was almost like I was asking a question they were hoping somebody would ask, like someone was paying attention. So we connected. Then I connected with, she's doing her, I'm going to get it wrong, and she's going to be mad at me. It's her PhD or master's at University of Florida.
Right. And
she's working with a supervisor. So he jumped in. So then I put together, I asked an editor at Audubon. I said, hey, you guys interested in this? And she said, well, I don't know. Send me a pitch. So I did a recce trip on my own. So I went out to the biologist. I spent the day with her and some of the volunteers that are part of this group. And I thought, you know what, there's something here. And even if the editor doesn't want it, I'm going to do it. So this is what happened. It was one thing. The editor in the end, it did end up liking it. And I did a whole formal pitch, and it got accepted. So I ended up doing the shoot. But had it not been accepted, I think I still would have done it, because I knew deep down there was something there. And what I loved was just the involvement of the women. Right. They were passionate and in love with this species, ready to do anything for it. And that was addicting right away. It was like, wow, okay, this isn't just a wildlife story. There's a human story, right?
Yeah.
And that's what they all are. So we can't fix any of these problems if we're going to exclude the humans, right? We can come down on the humans and say, well, we're doing all this stuff wrong, but this was a we're doing it right story.
And that's,
and that's what I wanted to tell.
That's such a common thread, isn't it, with people living on the edge of national parks or any person's livelihood that's affected by wildlife conservation has to be considered, because you're absolutely right. You can't just protect wildlife and forget about people.
No, that's a fail situation. I've as so many times I'm like, I go in and I judge and I think, oh, the humans this and this, but then you have to look at the other side and you have to say, well, why are the humans doing this? What is going on here? What sometimes it's just for food. And the species, whatever it is, happens to be food. Yeah. And so we need to fix the human problem before we can fix the conflict, with the species.
Yeah, 100%.
So, and there's not always a right answer, obviously, because we're not winning all the time either.
Yeah.
So.
And it sounds nice the way that, these projects evolve, that you kind of stumble upon something. And what I like about hearing your story, and again, it's for people who are interested in getting into nature photography, who listen to this, is this kind of long-term approach, really. And also just being brave. You're emailing people, calling them up, saying, hey, I'd like to help out with this, like trying to get some sources of funding because it's an important story to tell. And I can't wait to see the finished work. Have you got any?
I can't wait to see it either.
Do you try and put any kind of self-imposed? Oh no, I suppose you do have a deadline with this.
I've got a work deadline. Yeah, which is coming up actually. So, but yeah, I think it. I want to do more work on this because I know there are more pictures to be made and there are more instances to be made. So a lot of these stories are hard to tell because they require time.
Of course.
And an editor can give you 4 or 5 days, and the struggle for me is sometimes I know there's more that can be done in 4 or 5 days, and since I do have that Nat Geo background, I'm not, and not just Nat Geo background, but I do have a very high standard for myself, and if I know that something can be attained, I'm going to go over the days I've been allotted and I'll do it on my own.
Yeah.
And I'll invest in it because I want that picture. And I know it can be made, but you don't get to go out there and tell the wildlife to show up and look the right way. And I mean, I have this image in my head that I want. I have several in this situation, but it requires, people walking by at the right time, that the animal turning its head at the right time. And inevitably with these little guys, they've been the bane of my existence because they don't want to cooperate. Yeah. So I have other words for them than, cute owls. They've become these little characters that are out to just mess up every shot that I have. Yeah. So it's a struggle.
And you talking about this, I immediately thought of Jasper, good friend of yours, previous guest on this podcast, talking about when he did his island project, and he got a certain amount of funding for a certain amount of days. And then, of course, it just went way over. I think it ended up being whatever, 3-4 year project. And so with those 4 days, you got funding. Every extra day you're working, your day rate is just dropping. Well,
your day rate comes down to about negative, numbers. But look, I think with this one, I really went with my gut. And things worked out where the biologist and I became friends. And then you almost feel like you have a responsibility to the people involved. They want this story told. And I want to do justice to them. So you become emotionally connected. I'm sure at some point, enough is enough in terms of spending money on a project. But if it's, if your heart's in it and it means something to you and there's a message to be told from it and 4 days isn't enough, then you stay longer. You do what it takes. At least I did in this case. And I have to say, I know many photographers who will build days on and stay longer. And I recently had a conversation with another photographer friend who stayed longer also, who went back. So I want the best images for the story. And unfortunately, that doesn't always work with the budgets involved.
Of course.
Right.
And that's the addiction.
That's the reality. That's the addiction of the reality.
Yeah. And I guess the sad thing is a lot of the editors know that that photographers are addicted, and
I think that's true too.
We'll give her 4 days, but I know it's really going to take 50.
yeah, but she'll do it, and she'll do 50.
Yeah.
You know? No, I mean, I think so many of the editors their hands are tied because their budgets are made for them, and wildlife people's stories are really tough. They're really tough because you don't get to control weather. You don't get to control the wildlife. It might not even show up. So, you know, the question is, all right, well, how much money are we going to spend on this story, right? It's a great story, but could we just buy some stock photography and call it a day? And in a lot of cases, you can.
Yeah.
But I had a certain look for this. I wanted to portray this animal a certain way. I wanted it to be a character, not just a wildlife species. And that's what these guys are. Yeah. In this situation, they are characters. The community has names for each one. The biology, you know, it's pretty cool.
That's so cool.
And it's not often. I don't always get as invested as I am in this one, and I think it's just because of the personal connections and moments I've had with these little guys. And it becomes a challenge, right? You're not getting what you want. So as the photographer, I'm not getting what I want. And it's because this little guy has decided that I'm not getting what I want. And he's going to do everything he can to look the wrong way, you know? So it becomes this little personal
Of course it does.
vendetta,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I have that all the time.
It's addictive.
Yeah, it really is.
You
And
know?
it's good that you never get the perfect picture, because what would keep you going back?
Exactly.
It keeps you
coming back. Yeah.
So speaking of keeping going back, we have to talk about your bobcat project, because that's also been, well, it's reared some pretty spectacular images over the last few years, and you had one in the recent Wildlife Photographer of the Year, and and you know, the stuff that you're posting just looks spectacular. And I want to, this is another long-term project of yours, and we could talk about so many other projects, but these two are really kind of meaty and current, and it's always good to talk about photographers' current work and what they're going through. And can you tell us about the beginnings of that project, and was it a similar story in terms of getting access to these bobcats?
No. So the bobcats, I don't even know how it's hard to tell the bobcat story, because it comes from a very personal place also. And it was a species that I'd been working on a ranch for a bunch of summers, for the last been there now 6 years. Bobcats were something I'd always wanted to see. I knew they were on the ranch. I knew they denned under the house. I'd seen them once or twice, but it's these fleeting moments. And there were a lot of sort of things going on in my life, and then bobcat showed up. And I was telling you about this the other day, where I was, I've been on this ranch for 6 years and never had my first experience that summer, where 2017, when I photographed this family of bobcats, didn't even start out with one of the members of the family. It started out with a single bobcat who ended up coming down to a pond and pretty much sitting next to me for about 15 minutes. And
Wonderful.
Where I worked my way, at first I was shooting her with a 600 millimeter lens, doing it really fast, thinking this was the only image I was going to get. And then made the decision, all right, well, I wasn't in a blind anything. She came down on her own to drink, and I belly crawled my way all the way over to her, to the point where I was shooting with a 600 millimeter lens, and I was too close.
Wow.
So,
and did you know that was unusual at that time? I mean, with the experience of bobcats, usually
I hadn't researched them.
They're pretty shy, I would imagine. Right?
Bobcats are solitary. They're ghost animals. You don't see them. Everything that I knew about bobcat was the antithesis of what I was experiencing, right? So so once this one showed up, I made the decision. I knew at the house I was staying in that there were kittens under the house, and my students had gone. I think I was in between workshops, and I thought, all right, I'm going to sit outside and see how this pans out. The owner of the house had always put water out while we were all there, so I had seen the bobcat out at about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So I thought, all right, I'm going to sit out there. So I set up 2 little chairs and this big camo netting, and here I'm sitting there on a patio that never has someone sitting there with a 600 millimeter lens and 2 chairs and camo, as if the bobcat wasn't going to see me. And I'll never forget it. I sat out there, and I don't know, as a photographer, sometimes I think, you do something and you already know it's going to fail. You know, it's not going to show up. This is like part of you. And then all of a sudden, as they do, she just appeared. And there she was sitting at the water bowl drinking, looking straight at me. And here I'm thinking I'm hidden. And she's literally looking like almost over the glass right at me. Like, what do you think?
Like, nice try with the blind. Yeah.
You think you're invisible over there? And so one thing led to another. And once my students left again, I stayed. And I think for me, it was, let me see what I can do here. And in the end, a relationship developed if I may anthropomorphize, I've used this word several times today.
Of course. Of course.
She let me into her world. That's about as simple as I can say it. And, I come from a place where, trust became this thing. And now an animal was showing me a trust. And this is an animal that doesn't trust, right? So now this solitary animal is letting me giving me a window into her life with her kittens, and just showing up every day allowed that to happen. In the beginning, she wasn't too keen on my cameras. I had to switch out the cameras. She didn't like the shutter. We had some instances where I thought I'd screwed it all up, even the relationship, because I moved too quick, or I ended up coming up the stairs as she was coming down, whatever it was. But that summer, it was completely different than a well-researched intentional project. Completely unintentional, not researched at all. It was an emotional project.
Yeah.
It started emotionally, and the emotion carried through and kept me there, because now I had this relationship with this cat.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking immediately when you started talking and describing the situation. It's like nothing to do with photography at all.
No, it wasn't. It was almost like therapy, tell you the truth. For me, it was, I was going through a whole lot, and this animal shows up as if it were my therapist. So it was interesting because I stayed at the house months in the summer. I was alone. I mean, I'm alone on this ranch. It's one of the most, desolate feelings you have. I'm waiting all day to catch maybe 2 minutes with an animal, maybe 10, maybe 20 if she stays, or if she brings food back, or I had no idea from day to day what was going to happen. If it rained, it would be different. If I made the wrong move, it would be different. There were days she didn't show up or didn't come out until the sunset, and then I can't shoot. So it was about figuring things out. And that became sort of the theme throughout the whole relationship with this. And then I left at the end of the summer. The work was published, I think, the following spring by Nat Geo Online. One of the images was in Wildlife Photographer of the Year. And I went back the next summer. She had kittens again, a different set. And I didn't stay. I was there for a couple of weeks. She recognized me. So
Amazing.
I knew the relationship was still there.
And that really comes across in the image. So as a quick description, it's an absolutely beautiful image of 3 kittens drinking, and mum is in the background doing this beautiful stretch.
Yeah.
And you have this lovely blue sky, and the lighting's perfect. And it's like it's almost like they're domestic cats, but of course there's this incredible, wild feel to them.
Yeah.
But living on this ranch, it's a really beautiful picture. So we will put some links in so people can see this
great.
who haven't.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's continued now. I knew the relationship was still there. So when I went back this summer, I actually went back to spend a few months there because I decided I had the opportunity to live out there for a couple months. And mom cat is what I don't like to name the animals I photograph, because I don't believe in getting that. I'm saying I don't believe in getting that close to them, but then look what this whole story is about.
I know what you mean,
right?
but it's also something I thought about when you mentioned about anthropomorphizing, and, there's a bit of an apology around that, but I think it's, in a way, how else do we connect with animals? Because we see familiarities and we see signals that kind of relate to us and that resonate with us, and maybe scientists would frown on it because it's an unscientific approach and naming animals and anthropomorphizing, but that's how you get engaged as a kid.
Right. Well, I mean, look, this is how I got engaged as an adult too.
Yeah.
So I mean, scientists would debunk the whole thing and say, well, it's because of this or because of that. But I don't believe that at this point. It could be just biology, but it's not. There's something else going on there. And you were seeing stuff
that kind of debunks science around bobcats.
Yeah.
So, talk a bit about that, because I had no idea about that. It was fascinating.
So through some of the research that I'd done, I'd learned that, bobcats are completely solitary after the mother stays. The kids will usually stay with the mother up until about a year, and then they get pushed out. They have to find their own territories. They go do their own thing. You don't usually see bobcats together. They're pretty much solitary. They get together when, for mating, and then mom raises babies on her own. So last summer I saw her again. She had 2 more kittens. I didn't spend much time with them. And this summer I went back in April. And when I went back, she had a single kitten, and April was early for her. So all the couple years that I spent with her, it was June, July. There were probably 8-week-old kittens. So that would be May, June. So I was always there in July. So they'd be at least 8 weeks old.
Right.
It's still looking like almost like an 8-week-old domestic cat, if you will. That's when I had met them. And then this year I was there in April, and there was what looked like an 8-week-old kitten. So I thought, okay, what's going on here? She recognized me, but she was super nervous. So I don't know, my gut instinct is that something happened. Perhaps she had more kittens this summer and something happened. The other ones had been killed, or who knows what. But her behavior was different. The kitten disappeared, and Mom Cat and I had like this little goodbye moment, which will take too long to explain in this podcast. And I thought, all right, you know what? Good. There's sort of a goodbye and ending to this. I had no intentions of photographing her this year, because I kind of feel like if I'm going to do more on bobcats, it has to be bigger than just this ranch family, right? I need to do more on the state of bobcats and all the different things that it's going through, hunting and trapping and some of the science that's going on and all that. I had to make the story bigger. But so we have this little goodbye moment, and 3 days later, I find another female under the house that has 4 brand new kittens. And when I say brand new, I'm talking 3 days old. Wow. Eyes closed, 3 days old. So for 4 weeks, I got sucked into photographing them again. And the
addiction's coming back.
The addiction's back. But this is a new mother that I'll sort of back into what my theory is on this. But so when we go back to debunking some of the science, or what a biologist might say about behavior of bobcats, that they're solitary. At one point, I had 7 bobcats within 20 feet of me. They're under the house taking, shelter from the heat. And I have 3 adult bobcats. Okay. Probably about, 2 of them were close together. One of them was the new mother. And I'm thinking, all right, I'm laying here on my stomach, photographing this new mother and her babies. And there's 2 other bobcats to my right, and they're all adults. So this is 3 adults. And then if we add the 4 babies, that's 7 cats.
Did you recognize all of them?
Okay. So I recognize Mom Cat, who I knew, and I can recognize her because she has a spot pattern that's unique. And the new mother, the first day I started shooting her, I didn't get a reaction. I got no growl, no nothing. She didn't even get up and turn around. So that could be one of 2 things. She's with brand new kittens. She's not going anywhere. But in the past, I've gotten a warning or a growl or something.
Sure.
I've gotten that from Mom Cat over the years that I've known her. If I get too close, she'll growl at me. And then it's noted and I back off. But this cat, nothing. So here I'm thinking, all right, so how is this cat so chilled out with me? Then there's this new young male on the scene, and I'm thinking, okay, what's going on here? At first I thought it was a new boyfriend for Mom Cat. She lost her kitten. Maybe he killed the kitten. I don't know. And so I'm making up all these stories in my head. And then I'm thinking, well, we've got all 3 of them under the house, which doesn't seem right. No adult male would be sitting next to Mom Cat if it wasn't family. So my thought is, and I've yet to unfortunately, spot patterns from kitten to adult change, so it's very difficult to match them up.
Right.
I've been trying to match up this new female, and I think she is the kitten from 2017. There was a female kitten that I photographed in the family, the original family, and I think it's her.
Wow.
So now we're 2 years later, she's got her own kittens, and we're full circle.
So you've got three
starting all over again.
generations
Yeah.
of
and I
of-
think the male is a sibling.
Oh wow, interesting. So this is a real cat soap opera
This
going on underneath this ranch, and you were like the original Bobcat lady, right?
Well, yeah, I've been the Bobcat whisperer.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on.
They're all hanging out with you.
And they only hang out with me.
Yeah.
So, other people have come onto the scene and they're gone. And they don't tolerate anyone else. I haven't done anything. I'm not feeding them. I'm not doing anything that would other than showing up
And spending time.
spending time.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
And it's such a good lesson for any, wildlife photographer wanting to learn to get better pictures. You've got to put your time in. Same with the owls.
It's spending time.
Yeah.
It's spending time. And the more you spend time, the more you learn behavior, the more you actually know how to act. And the more you can start to think about different images. The longer you photograph one subject, the further you have to push the photography. Because, look, I was photographing bobcats at one location with very limited variety. I was photographing them within a patio and a fence of a house. Now, how do you diversify? But I had no choice because I couldn't chase them out onto the field or follow them for the most part. So how do you tell a story that seems monotonous? And that's what pushed me also, is like, how do I do this and make every image different enough so that you don't feel like you're looking at the same thing over and over and over and over again?
And getting out of your comfort zone.
Oh, yeah.
Which is one of the biggest challenges as well.
I was way out of my comfort zone. 110 degrees in the shade with gnats is not comfort zone by any stretch of the imagination, So, but yeah, I definitely out of your comfort zone. I had to, and I also had to heed the warnings I was getting from my subjects, right? So big Canon DSLRs, she didn't like the shutter.
Right.
She wouldn't go near it. And everything, everyone thinks it's amazing to me, the preconceptions we have of animals, that they're these lesser intelligent beings. I find that it's completely debunked. So this cat.
Oh, it's also phenomenal arrogance.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because I had a camera, shutter went off once. I learned my lesson in 2 seconds. This cat, so I had put the camera at the base of the stairs. There was sort of a widow's walk at the top of the house, so like a patio on the roof, right? So there's this metal stair, which is relevant in some, or it's apparent in some of the pictures.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I'm going to put the camera at the base of the stair. Well, yeah, once. Because once she heard the shutter went off, she jumped. So that messed me up for the kittens, because the kittens were now wary of it. They follow direction from mom.
Of course.
Yeah. She never again went in front of that camera until months and months and months later. But she didn't go in front of that camera again. What she started doing, instead of going to the base of the stairs and jumping up, she'd go halfway up and she'd jump from halfway up so she didn't have to go in front. Yeah. And then when she came down, she jumped down halfway in the middle of the stairs.
Amazing.
I mean,
they just know exactly.
It was, and now it's funny because I've used the GoPro with her, and I was curious what she was going to do with the GoPro this year, because last summer I had a moment with her where she went over to the GoPro, and I watched the whole thing. She went over, she started nuzzling it, she laid down on it, she put her arms around it, and just like your house cat, was rubbing her face all over it, and literally looking at me as she did this. I mean, I have it on camera, right? She's like literally watching me as if, lifting the middle finger at me, like, yep, I know exactly what I'm doing.
It must have been such a joy going back to that and then looking at it later.
I had, I'm standing there with the long lens just to sort of document it. And I'm literally, because at that point I was inside because I had just left it out to document her. And I'm standing there with the long lens, like laughing out loud. Yeah. Like we have this relationship. It's even through a window. She's staring at me. She can see me through there. And anyway, so this year I put the GoPro out. Exactly the same behavior. She went to that thing in 2 seconds, rubbed her face all over it, knocked it down. And then I have this on film too. So this summer she peed on it right in front of me. She just sprayed it. And I was like, yep, thank you. You know, it's like what, I swear, it's like this little,
Yeah,
yep,
little
it's
power,
mine.
little power play going
It's
on.
mine.
Perhaps.
I smell myself. I know it's yours.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, for sure.
So yeah, it's.
It sounds amazing, and you know, I was actually going to ask you about video as well. It's something that can't really be ignored these days in photography. People need and want, and for good reason. It's cool seeing behind the scenes stuff. Do you just kind of shoot to have a range, or do you have an idea what you might want to do with this stuff?
Yeah, unfortunately, I wish I was. I'm feeling my way through video right now, and having photographed her already and bobcats already, I had two choices with this new family, and my thought was, all right, I already have still frames of a family. Am I going to do that again? I mean, what do I not have? What do I need? And if I need something more, what do I need it for? Am I going to, I mean, it's already been published online. I mean, there are a few places who still might want to publish it, but what am I going to get that's new still photo wise? Well, now there's 4 kittens. So, but again, now if I add something else, it's a new family. So I don't want to put that into the mix of what I have. So I was sort of intent on doing some video, right? And getting behavior and showing, because while stills are powerful, when you actually watch this animal operate and see how she acts, I mean, I've spent now almost 3 weeks face down in the dirt trying to film underneath the house where my, camera's on one side of the edge of the house and I'm on the other, and it's just a nightmare situation. But it's very difficult for a still photographer to go video because you have to commit. You can't switch back and forth. And that's what I was doing. I'm like, oh, let me get it on video. Oh, let me get it on still. And then you miss it all.
Yeah.
So I was committing, like if I started on video, I would stay on video. And it's a learning curve, but I do think some of the video is more powerful. If you're trying to connect people with something, I think at times in this case, the mother caring for her babies, just seeing some of that, seeing the behavior is almost more powerful on video. I was actually listening to one of these free music things on YouTube because I was trying to find some music to give to, or to put to a slideshow of bobcat stuff. And then I got sidetracked and I just left the music playing. And then I started going through some of the video and I was hearing some of this just acoustic sort of feel good music. And then I was watching the video and here I'm tearing up and it's video, right? So now I'm seeing the effect of when you pair music with the video and you're having these wildlife moments, that it's quite powerful. It's really
pulls
quite
on
powerful.
on the strings, doesn't it? Yeah, big time.
And ultimately,
someone said to me once, sound is like 80% of it.
I think it is.
Yeah,
it is, because if you mess up sound, and I've done that in interviews where I've messed up the sound, you screw up the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a lot of times, sometimes it's unrecoverable, especially if it's an interview like where they're talking. But my goal, I think the bobcat is one of these vermin species where people don't know much about it because it's not often, no one spends time with them. Like people they have them as pets. It's one of these animals that's a persecuted animal, is hunted, it's sport hunted, it's trapped and its pelts are sold. It's also pet in the exotic pet trade, but yet no one knows that much about the wild bobcat.
Right.
And there's something very intriguing about them because they're so hard to see. I've read some hunters' reports. I read this guy's, he wrote something about hunting bobcats. The guy hunts bobcats. He kills bobcats for fun. But he had this experience where there was one bobcat, I think it was this one male who'd come, looked him in the eye. He had this whole moment with this animal. He didn't shoot it, and then he saw it again after that, and he never shot this animal. He shot other ones. And
so random,
it's totally random, but he talks about the power of the encounter he had because this is such a difficult animal to see. And I think that's one of the reasons they're so hunted as well. For hunters, it's a challenge to get them to come close and to find them and to call them in.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate.
Of course.
For me, it's fortunate because it's like this magical experience of being able to photograph this ghost cat. And I've had experiences that most probably haven't had with this animal, which, you know, it's a privilege to be able to have had that. But then it's also an addiction for others who want to have this cat as a pet or who want to hunt it. And it's a different kind of addiction, but it's because this animal is so elusive and so special that way. You know, it's this challenge, unfortunately.
And that experience that you described that hunter had with that cat, it kind of got me thinking about relating it back to your work. And whilst this was a spontaneous project to start off with, obviously you've been doing it for a number of years, and some of the work is out there in story form, but is in going back to what you were talking about with using photography as a tool. Is this also part of your mission to not convert every hunter, but to kind of plant seeds and show the sensitive side of the bobcat, and that this is an animal simply just trying to rear its young, find food, shelter, like all of us, and that somehow you could affect some kind of change? Because we touched on the conservation photography side of things, and it's a tricky subject to kind of get right. So what's your approach and ultimately your end goal with this project? And the last question is, how do you finish a project?
Well, I don't know, because it's still ongoing, and I'm not sure you finish a project like this. I think this kind of a project, depending how deep your curiosity is, I've only just begun this project. If I want to explore the story of bobcats on a bigger level, there's space to do that. And I just need to ask the right questions and find the right things that are part of this story, because my personal story with the bobcats is just one part of something else. Like, you know, I could go out and tell the story of the species in all its different, you know, forms of hunting, of you know, being a pet, of you know, where it exists on the ecology side of things, where it fits in the pyramid of, you know, the wildlife in North America. But back to, you know, what's sort of my goal in creating awareness. I would love to think that this story would change the behaviors of people. I'm not sure it can do that. I'd like to believe it can, but I'm not sure. I think people are really good at looking at something and saying, and then walking away and continuing doing whatever behaviors they're doing. You know, they can talk about, we saw this great exhibit at the Houston Museum, because the picture's up at the Houston Museum now. I forget the name of the museum, but it's in Houston, the Wildlife Photographer of the Year.
Yeah.
And I've actually gotten an email from someone who saw it and contacted me and told me their version of what they saw, which was pretty cool. I love hearing from people and hearing how my work, you know, so few people do that.
What did they say?
So this gentleman talked to me about how he saw this tension where, you know, on first look, you see these cats sitting around a bowl, and it looks like a domestic cat sitting at a house drinking water with his kittens out of a bowl. And then there's this realization that, oh my God, you're looking at something wild. And he talks about this tension that goes through the image, and it sort of leaves you hanging, and you don't know what to think. And then he went on further to explain to me that his friend, who was also looking at the image, had said he saw this, you know, svelte, you know, hot mother, you know, stretching after yoga with her beautiful little kids drinking water out of a bowl. And I thought, wow, it's very eye-opening to me to hear that, and actually really cool to see the different perspectives people take away from an image like this. Because I don't look at it and think of either of those things. You know, I have a whole different connection to it, which is personal, deeply, deeply personal, right? So I'm coming from a completely different place when I look at this image. But I think it, you know, I had a wonderful experience with some of the people I'm close to around this ranch who, once I started photographing these cats and sharing the images of the cats with them, they changed some of their hunting rules of the ranch, which I thought, wow, okay, that's a step. And that was an unpreached, that was merely me sharing what I was showing.
Yeah.
And it made others apparently think about the animal differently. So I know there is a huge power in connecting the human to the animal, but that was on a more personal level. Whereas on a bigger audience level, people just coming through a museum, I'm not so sure their behaviors are going to change. These were people I knew. These were people I shared images with on a daily basis.
Yeah. And it's difficult to measure, isn't it, with bigger audiences. But that, for me, is enough alone, why you're doing that project. If you can affect change, behavior change in just actually that's quite significant because they're landowners of, I don't know how many acres, for example, is this ranch. I'm assuming it's thousands of acres, right? And if they change the law, then, you're going to save a few bobcats. And
I mean, I would like people to realize that our actions have big consequences for species that we don't even think about. So it's always, I guess since I was a kid, I looked at animals. Everyone that I met was its own individual. And I read something, it was, I think Melissa Grew actually had it on her Instagram feed a while back. It was a quote about, and I forget who said it, about how each creature has a biography. And it struck a chord with me that's what I've been trying, that's what I want people to know, is that this animal cares for its young the same way you care for your children. It makes sure the kids are clean. It makes sure they eat. She teaches them on a daily basis. I mean, this new mother cat spent about a week sitting in the same spot. And then here I'm thinking, she's just getting up and moving. And then if I actually think about it further, no, she's not just getting up and moving. She's now moving 10 feet to the left or the right because she's trying to get the kittens to follow her and learn, the parameter of their worlds. And she's making it bigger and bigger. So this is like she's educating them as she goes along.
Immediately. Yeah.
Exactly. They're in school, they're learning. I mean, I've been with these animals when she leaves one alone at night. So the whole night this animal is alone, and here in my human brain, I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do if this animal is still alone in the morning? Do I rescue? I can't get involved, So I got to watch all this stuff. And the fact that we can actually separate ourselves from that is amazing to me. But I have a different connection on a daily basis than most people do. Yeah. So I just wish I could share it in a way that affects people more deeply. And I don't have the answer to that way. I mean, right now I'm doing it through photography. Maybe video is stronger. I don't know. Maybe I don't have the right platform. Maybe I need to be getting up and passionately speaking about it to camera clubs and hunting clubs and all these people so that they can see how I reacted from my experience, because I get all emotional about it.
Of course, yeah.
So
I think, certainly for me, listening to you now, I've got like goosebumps about this. I want you to go and start talking to camera clubs and go to the hunters, because there's nothing better than a reformed hunter, right?
Right. No, I mean,
those guys are, they become like staunch defenders.
They do. Yeah. And absolutely. And I've met hunters who are defenders of certain species, and it's so cool. But they can pick and choose too. Where I don't get that. Why can you kill one thing and not another thing? Yeah. So for me, I want to save it all. But I don't know. I would like to connect. And that's sort of my goal with the camera and youth is. And not just youth, but adults as well, is that camera is a tool. Yeah. Whether you're the photographer using the tool to visually connect someone with, another species or an environment, or just their general world around them, or you're a person using this tool where you end up connecting with your environment, sort of subconsciously in a way. It's just the whole, camera and photograph thing is a super powerful thing. From the day that I, saw someone cry in a living room in Connecticut. You know, there is a power there. And I think the power harnessed the right way and shown the right way and on the right platform can have effect. But, you know, I still don't know if it's enough. You know, it's not enough.
Yeah, I think it's one piece of, you know, a very complicated jigsaw. But there's no doubt that it's an important role. You know, people do respond and engage very quickly with video, with stills, much more than reading a report, you know, about the state of biodiversity, for example. Yeah. You can show like a really, you know, graphic picture of you know, a glacier melting. It's even a simple before and after, you know, is quite amazing.
Well, it's like the polar bear, the skinny polar bear,
you
know, and then people are paying attention. Or the refugee, you know, this refugee situation's been going on for years. And then all of a sudden, you know, someone walks up onto the beach with a dead child and the world goes crazy, gets really upset about the refugee problem in Eastern Europe, but it's been going on for a long time. So photography, obviously, very, very powerful tool.
Without a doubt.
We don't want people just to pay attention. We want them to change.
Yeah.
And so how do you get them to change? You know, how do you get them to care more or to stop cutting trees down or, you know, stop poaching or whatever it is? And that's that next step of, okay, why are the humans doing this? There is a reason. So let's address the reason.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know. I don't have the answer.
No, neither do I. But it's really great to talk about it. It's been really lovely to talk to you. You know, we've been going, again, I always can't
We've
believe
been going all day.
We've been going all day. And we've already been going for an hour. It's now dark in here.
It is.
We've got a dinner being prepared for us.
We do.
But I did want to ask you one more question.
Yeah,
and again, it's kind of for the young people, and you're, you know, super qualified to do this, but you know, young person getting into this. And actually, I shouldn't just say young person, because there are a lot of photographers out there that, you know, did have other jobs, whether they were in finance or, you know, in the city working, and they have just fed up with that life, or maybe not, but they just wanted a career change, and they're thinking about, you know, how do I break into this business? Right. And sometimes my advice is like, don't bother. It's like, but yeah, what would your advice be?
To what? You gotta be a little bit more specific. A little more. I mean, you gotta give me something. What would my advice be? I can't go on that. You gotta break it down a little bit.
Okay. Well, breaking it down would be, you know, one of the things that has come out of these podcasts for me is to get recognition. You need to tell stories with your pictures.
Right.
So where would, you know?
Where do you start?
Yeah. Where do you start with that?
Oh.
Because I always think like you wouldn't, you know, I would say there's no point in going to photograph tigers. There'd be no point in going to photograph polar bears, because there are so many people much better qualified than you to do that. So where does a young person with, you know, good technical knowledge and skill, where do they begin to kind of get recognition and do something different?
I find it a very difficult question, because my path to this was not direct. And it took a lot of screwing up. It took a lot of tears, a lot of, I don't know what I want to do. I still don't know what I want to do. I mean, this is part of my journey. Is it the end? I don't know. Is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? I don't know. But two things come to mind. A very well-respected and well-known editor once said to me, you know, what are you in love with? And I thought it was I didn't know how to answer the question. I thought it was like a cheeky question. You know, what do you mean? What am I in love with? I'm in love with my boyfriend, or I'm in love with my dog, and they asked me again, what are you in love with? And I didn't know. And I can now tell my students the same thing, but I found something. The first time I was able to answer that question was bobcats.
Yeah.
Right. So,
and that's
it was months later when I realized it, because I put my heart and soul into something. Now, with that said, one of the biggest mistakes I made, or I have made in the way that I did things, is I got into animals through, I mean, I realized the connection between the power of photography and affecting people. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. I just thought it was a cool thing. Like, oh, okay, there's something here that's kind of cool and powerful. I didn't know about stories. I didn't think about stories. I didn't have a journalism background. I never went to school for photography at all. Never took a photo class. So I didn't connect telling stories with the photography I was doing. Portraits, weddings, and weddings are stories. So I found my passion in Africa. That's where Africa bit me, as it does. It gets under your blood, it gets in your soul. So I kept going back there because it wasn't just the wildlife, there was something else there. But I was in love with that place. And while that's not a mistake, what the mistake was is I kept going over an ocean to figure this out, right? So I think for those who want to get into it, look in your backyard, okay? Look right around you at what's important to you. Your garden, your local community, whether it's a cultural thing that's going on, a social thing that's going on. Find something that interests you and go back again and again and again and again. And try and, quote unquote, tell stories visually in your own environment. You don't need to go over an ocean to do it. That's the hardest way to learn. And the problem with it is, oh yeah, it's fun to go do that, but then you leave it and come back and you can't continue the work. Whereas if you stick closer to home, whether it's at a nature center or a wildlife rescue center or something like that, especially if it has to do with wildlife, sort of that's my focus. So those are the examples I'm going to give. You could go to the local soup kitchen, something that matters to you locally, start to work there. Explore your community and your world there, and practice making pictures there. Fall in love with something around you, close to you, so that you can continue to work on it. I think one of the biggest mistakes is to go too far. I've reviewed so many portfolios and people are like, oh yeah, here are my pictures. And they kind of don't know where to go from there. They want to tell stories, but they're photographing polar bears and tigers and this, which is, it's great. You go on safari, you make pretty pictures, but you can't tell stories that way. Stories require time and boots on the ground and meeting people and meeting characters and finding the narrative and figuring out what it is. And you can't do that if you're flying back and forth every 6 months for 10 days.
Yeah. And you've also got a big carbon footprint under your conscience as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. So it would be start close to home.
Yeah.
Learn your gear. Start close to home and work out from there, and be curious, ask questions, think, listen, and start close, and then spread your wings and go further once you figure out how to do things, and fall in love and figure out what that means, so that the next time you want to find a new subject, falling in love isn't so hard. It's kind of sort of the way it's supposed to be in life, right? You fall in love, you get your heart broken, and then you move on, and it's either more difficult or less difficult, but it's supposed to be easier, right? As you get more into it. But I think it's the same with photography is fall in love with something close to home and practice the craft. And don't be afraid to ask questions, to try. And my students, they all want to go big, and I'll tell every single one of them, find a fox den close to your home, or find something you can work on close to your home, your bird feeder or whatever you do, because that forces your photography to change. It forces you to get bored with your subject and think of new ways to photograph it. And that's the only way you grow as a photographer, I think. That's just sort of my 2 cents on it.
I think it's awesome. You did say 2 things, but you may have already covered the second one when you said I had 2 points. Do you remember what the second one was, or did you cover it?
I thought I covered it. I thought that was the first thing I answered. Yeah, it was, it's fall in love and stay close to home.
I didn't want to miss it just in
fall
case.
Fall in love and stay close to home. Yeah. Well, and that's sort of hypocritical because I've never stayed close to home. Right. But yeah, find a spot to work out of and go back again and again and again.
Yeah, and whilst you may not stay close to home, when you visit these locations, you're certainly spending a lot of time in them, and I guess that's the point.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned how you did your book and spent months on the West Coast of the United States.
Yeah. Right?
You didn't get that by going on vacation for 2 weeks and then going home and then coming back for 2 weeks. You embedded, and you only, you can't explore and find the unique characteristics of a place or a species if you don't spend time. And that's the most, I've heard a million excuses. Well, I'm only on safari in Africa for 2 weeks, and it wasn't sunny and it was overcast, and that's why my pictures look like this. Well, I'm sorry, great. But if you want the better pictures, if you want the better stories, you have to stay.
Yeah.
Go get an apartment in Africa. And I could be taking my own advice right now, because there are a few people I know who are saying, Karen, I told you to go do that. So
it sounds like
I can give you their names, but I'm not going to say anything at this point. But
it sounds like you're busy enough and you've got tons going on.
I don't have tons. I mean, I think we all do.
Absolutely.
But we all still have dreams and things we need to realize, so hopefully along the way we figure some of them out.
That's right. And it's the addiction keeps us going.
It does.
Yeah.
It's the addiction that keeps us, passionate and poor, I guess, at the same time.
Wow, I'm going to take that away. Amazing. Karen, it's been so lovely talking with you.
It's been such a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me. This has been great, and
a real pleasure.
I think what you're doing is great, because the photo world that we live in is very lonely and secular a lot of the times. So it's your podcasts allow me to go listen to somebody else and hear that other people might have the same problems or the same thoughts. And, while I might not even know them, it's easier to say, hey, I heard you on Matt's podcast and I want to talk to you about this or that. So
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think it's cool that you're picking people's brain on this subject.
Yeah. Well, I mean, secretly, getting all this expert advice. It
was for free, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again, and we'll keep the conversation going.
Absolutely.
Also, I should say we're going to put all your links and websites and where people can see your work and on the page on my website. It will be available on iTunes, and we can keep the conversation going.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks so much, Karen. It's so good to hear her talking about pouring her heart and soul into photography, and she certainly poured her heart and soul into this interview and gave us such an insight into her ideas and working practice, and also the struggles, which I think never really go away whatever level you're at. So you can check out more of Karen on Instagram, which is @Kaigner. That's Kaigner. And her website is KarenAigner.com. There are a full set of links on her page in the podcast section of my website, so I encourage you to check all of those out, especially as she's so much content and such a varied and engaging style, and I feel is very generous of spirit. Many photographers do this, and she's right up there with writing in great detail about the stories and emotions behind her images. Please leave a review on iTunes if you've enjoyed this. I say it every month, but it really does help to get higher up in the charts. It helps to get out to a wider and more diverse audience. And, I want people to hear these inspiring and engaging stories. Got some great guests on this podcast, so you can help us by sharing links, talking to your friends, sharing it amongst your loved ones, families, colleagues. Let's get it out there. If you would like to meet me, come on a workshop. If you want to learn more about my approach to photography, I run them every month on Hampstead Heath in North London. Have a look on the workshops page on my website and get in touch if you've got any questions. The next podcast is going to be released it's going to have a part 1 and part 2, which is really exciting. I'm going to be releasing them over Christmas time. So be sure to stay tuned. You can check out the dates for that. Until then, thanks again for listening. See you soon.